afternoon. So we're going to start today with me going through a little bit about what we do and how we do it and why we do it and how we help our clients. And then we'll invite the 5 analysts up front to sit up here and we'll talk about where we all think the industry is going and what's happening and what they do and why. So Parrot Analytics, what do? We focus on the intersection between data and the creativity of our business, why we're here and all of that type of stuff. So we run the entire value chain from production and financing all the way through to distribution and sales, linear programming and scheduling strategies, etc. Why do we do it? We focus on this part of the business because the industry overall is in a massive change, right? All driven by the consumer. However you look at it, it's really driven by the consumer. The consumer is now beginning to access their content very differently from 20 years ago when I started in the business. Now they can look at it anywhere, anytime, on any platform. They can start watching on one platform, finish watching on another platform. It's short form, it's long form, it's all sorts of things. And that means that how we used to measure success and how we used to measure hits for TV series, whether it was GRP based and panel based, is no longer sufficient for us, right? Now we really need to get into the heart of how people are engaging with the content and the topics and what they're doing with it. And our perspective around that is that it's not enough to look simply at the views and the analytics you may be getting from a platform or from your own platform. You have to also be able to have a sort of 360-degree holistic picture of what you're seeing. And the reason for it is we're kind of the last industry, I would say, that is being changed by data and how data is coming into play, right? We're the ones who've been holding out for a long time, and for good reason. Because in some markets we don't have enough data, and in other markets, right, storytelling and stories, you can't just have data, you still have to have the creativity and the passion behind it. So how do we do that? At the heart of everything we do at Parrot is a belief that every single TV show, every episode of every series has its own DNA. Right? It's a living, breathing aspect of our daily lives. And that could be because it has a director that you love, or it has talent that you love or that you're discovering, that it has music that's very specific to it. Different episodes can have guest stars or different plot lines or whatever it might be. And so it's this idea of a content genome and our capacity now, after a very long time of working at it, to figure out the interrelationship between each one of these internal factors. And so what we look at when we start tracking any piece of content that we've ingested is all of these factors, right? It's not about hashtags or keywords, it's about how all of these different pieces of every show are being engaged with or consumed by viewers. And why do we do that? We do that because then that allows us to understand the impact that the external factors have on those internal factors, right? So our windowing strategies, is it a franchise? Is it a re-release? Is it from some other type of IP, a story or a book or whatever it might be? After 3.5 trillion data points, we can now start to predict, based on moving around the internal DNA factors, what is going to happen in the external factors, right? So now we can start to predict if we're going to co-produce across these countries and we're going to use this talent, how would it compare to the performance of another show that we've already tracked historically, right? And that's how, for instance, we've been able to help clients long before it was ever released pick up Handmaid's Tale, based on the success of similar titles, similar genres of the book itself and the original IP in their markets. So we do it by looking at the same types of things that most everybody looks at, right? We look at blogging sites and all the social media sites, and we look at fan and critic sites and Wikipedias and informational pages. Video streaming sites, microblogging sites, all of those types of things. The video streaming sites include Dailymotion and YouTube and iQIYI in China. We have a very unique thing that we look at, though. We look at about 85% of the world's Tor traffic because of a patented piece of software that our founders designed. And essentially, we see whenever anybody goes and tries to stream or download peer-to-peer a file. So if somebody in this room were to go to one of the illegal sites and click on episode 2, season 7 of Game of Thrones, we would see that. But uniquely, we don't just see the response, we see your request. So we see that you've requested it, and then we see how far you have to go to get it, right? Whether it's immediately available, like a Game of Thrones, or whether it's something more unique that takes 5 or 6 hops before you get it back. And that's all not personally identifiable, so there's no big issues with that. But one of the things that we've looked at is, and spent a lot of time on, is that's great, and we can all do that. But not all engagement is created equally. So a Twitter impression, or showing up in a Facebook timeline, or a Facebook like is not the same thing for us as an industry as whether somebody's actually streamed 2 episodes back to back, right? If you have 22 million Twitter impressions off of the back of 14,000 unique authors, the 14,000 are valuable to us. The 22 million, that's great, we should include it, and our CMO could be really excited about that number. But it doesn't actually tell us how many of those 22 million people would be willing to pay $3.99 a month if we were to try and sell them that show on an SVOD, OTT, or whatever it might be. But the 14,000 people, right, they're quite likely. If they're writing 2, 2.5, 3 tweets in order to make up the 22 million impressions, then that's not bad. We think we could probably sell them. So we spent a lot of time figuring out how you put all of those things together and how you know and look at the value of each one of them and how that goes together, and that's the demand rank. And so within the demand rank, as I said, we put the sort of passive impressions at the bottom, and then we go up and add more weight as it becomes more of a sort of indication of a willingness to consume or a potential to be willing to pay either in time by watching an ad or pay money to watch a show, right? I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here. So how do we, so why? What does that mean for us as a business, and why do we do this, and what do we help our existing clients around the world do? Well, so we can help them look at what type of content to invest in and produce, right? So we can look at over and under indexing of genres across regions or in markets. What does that mean? Well, that means, as you can see here, in Central Europe, documentary over-index, in Scandinavia. Children over-indexes by comparison to action and adventure, which under-indexes across the rest of Europe. We can look at subgenres and how that has demand, and how the demand in Europe relates or correlates to the demand outside of Europe. So you have global is the pinkish one, and Europe is the blue one. And so you can see that some of them tend to follow the same patterns, but not always. Now we look at this with the fastest growing genres in Europe. And so this is over the last 12 months. And you can see, for instance, that in Europe, competition reality and comedy reality have been growing much more quickly in Europe than they have in the rest of the world. So now you can start to get an idea of where should I be spending money? How should I be doing it? What are the movements? What are the movements changing? We can see flow around the world as well, right? So there's a flow that tends to start in the US and Western Europe and then be picked up in other parts of the world. So if we can already see what's trending in terms of genre and genre indexing across the US and sort of Western Europe, then we can probably predict what's going to happen in MENA or Asia or whatever it might be. So we help clients also with buying. So this is looking at May, the top 5 overall TV shows in Spain versus the top 5 overall TV shows in Italy, according to our demand expressions. And the demand expressions, the numbers going out across the bottom. So that's what happens when you come out of our demand rank, and it's the sort of most common denominator from it. It does not relate to eyeballs. It does not relate to individual people. It is just simply 2 million, 4 million, 6 million in this case. In certain shows, it'll be 100 million in a given market. And these are actually looking at, you can see how the different markets have different habits. Then we can look at affinity. So this is actually something for a company in Italy. And they have all of these shows in their platform. And what this shows is Riverdale and how the acquisition for them of Riverdale fit very well within the rest of their existing catalog, right? So now this becomes an acquisition question. Should I buy it? Does it fit with the rest of my catalog? Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? When do I schedule it? Content selling, right? So now we can see how data can provide insight into where you should be trying to sell a new show. Right? How's it already trending? And one of the key things in the way that Parrot looks at the world is GRPs and standard sort of metrics that we've been using for a long time, even the panel-based ones, work great if you've already bought the show, it's already airing, and it's already airing on something that actually has a metric behind it, which doesn't actually fit in every country, right? So we're now looking at, you haven't bought the show yet, you haven't sold the show yet, it's not legally available necessarily in some of these markets. How's it already being picked up? How's that moving? How's the heat map of that moving? And the biggest difference, and I'll be interested to hear the panelists when we get to the next one, but the biggest difference for me over the last 20 years is that when I started, over 20 years ago, we dictated how windowing strategies played out internationally. It was about how we sold to what markets, in what groupings, and at what times. Today, consumers have access within 25 minutes of broadcast, generally, to any show anywhere in the world. Right? If you go to some of these illegal sites, their UI and their sort of homepage will have the top trending shows from all over the world, whether they're legally available or not. Right? It's just there, and they're talking about them, and they start to see, you know, what's moving, and their friends talk about them and all of that. So it's a very different reality that we have today, where we don't have the same amount of control, and yet we still need to be as predictive as possible in terms of how we want to get content out there and get people in tune. So this is about Scandinavian crime dramas in the first quarter, so you can see again, the redder it is, the higher the percentage of travelability. And travelability is this idea that we have that it's the percent popularity in a country outside of the country of origin based on its popularity in the country of origin. So very simply, Scandinavian crime dramas have a 100% marker, if you would, in Europe, and of that they have 56% Latin America, right? So they have 56% of the popularity in Latin America than they do in their home countries. So now we look at things like the demand distribution curve. Here, what we're really focusing on is we're looking at, if you take an average title in the market, right? So we add up all the titles, we figure out where the average sort of range is here. Then we can now start to see a sort of bell curve representation of the long tail, right? Because 65% of the shows are average, 0.01% are exceptional. We know generally what those are, but now you can see. So this is in Europe, across all of Europe, and you can see it. Now we can start to pinpoint, you know, Cobra Kai, for instance, is already a show that's performing pretty well. Content marketing. This is interesting. So we look at when we look at the world, our clients and our team tend to also want to break it down into three sort of buckets. So I showed you where we're collecting all the information from, but there's kind of three buckets that are particularly important, right? So there's the overall, or four, I guess, is the overall number. Then there's a number that looks at the video streaming. So that's our peer-to-peer data in YouTube and Dailymotion, whatever else it might be. And then there's all the social sources, and then there's everything else. So what this looks at, what this shows us is that the list of shows that are most popular overall, right, across the entire spectrum, are not the same as the list of shows that are most popular, if you would, or whose highest demand contribution to that total number is coming from social media. And that's because today people engage with the shows very differently. So it's not just this way. If I were to recreate this for scripted or for unscripted, let's say reality, these two would again change. If we were just looking at the reality genre, or if we were just looking at crime thrillers or whatever it might be, for each one of those, the same thing happens again. Okay. Then we also look at working with our clients around demand and marketing spend. And this is an idealized title because we can't show the stuff that we do, but this is an idealized title. And essentially what it's showing is as the spend increases, so too does the demand, and generally the demand tracks slightly behind the spend, right? Which makes sense. As you're starting to increase your spend, the more you increase it moving up into Premiere, the higher the demand expressions go. But one of the things that's interesting about this is now we're raising a hypothesis that our traditional spend of you have a decent amount of spend, then you kick it up in the sort of last week, you really kick it up in the 24, 48 hours before the show premieres, and then you plateau it, and then over time it comes down. We might actually want to move that up a couple of days and plateau earlier, because if assuming the same amount of budget, because actually what we're seeing based on how the trends are picking up and how the demand expressions pick up with the spend, that because of that slight delay, if you move it earlier, then you will have a higher pop, right? So there's lots of different ways we can use it. You can use it for how different campaigns are performing. This is the same sort of thing. Once it's launched versus pre-release versus whether you're just doing awareness on social or you're doing behind the scenes, which tends to include video. Specific activities on popularity, right? We've seen this a lot lately, where a show gets canceled and then immediately picked up again on another platform, right? So what happens in between? How does that work? Does it continue to have the same impact? In this case, it sort of goes back down to where it had been previously. And I think this is, we'll hit this, and then I think it's probably a good time to have everybody else jump up. But what we look at and spend a lot of time looking at, and as I talked about, we look at affinity, which is the predictive correlation of what people watch after they watch something else. And we do this with a lot of our peer-to-peer and video streaming data. What that means is that we can see that you watch Game of Thrones, and then you went on to watch Big Bang Theory, or American Dad, or whatever it might be, right? And then you move out from there. What this image is, which is very difficult to see or pinpoint here if you're not used to these things, but what it is every single point on this image is a different TV show. And that is essentially the UK peer-to-peer and download data that we had January to May 2018. And that's every show. And then so you can get into it more and deeper. And then you can see that's actually one of the shows. and then you can see how you pull out from there. We can do it by networks, et cetera, et cetera. I can continue to move through these, but it's probably more exciting for me than for everyone else. So, having said that, I can make this available, or I think NATPE will make this available on their site, or however it is, so anybody who wants the deck can have the deck. Happy to chat with anybody afterwards, and I think based on that, we should move on to the next one. Let me give that back to you. All right. Fashion cards, I like these. So I'm gonna invite the panelists up, and we'll sit down, and then we'll open it up. We'll have we'll start with a slide, which I think will get us going, and then from there, hopefully we'll get out there and address it. So first, Andrew Sini is the Vice President of Formats at Banerjee Rights, the distribution arm of Banerjee Group, with operations in more than 16 countries. They're the world's largest independent production. Gary Wolf runs strategic development for All3Media, contributing to the divisional strategy of the business, and is responsible for the digital publishing, insight, and business development functions. Salim Muqaddam is VP and General Manager for Central and Eastern Europe at BBC Studios, where he has responsibility for all of BBC Studios activities across CEE, including content sales, formats, digital, and channels. Sini Hatuna Boylu is Head of Content and Acquisitions at Viasat World, leading the team which fuels the pipeline of content for the company's channels and services. Viasat World is a leading international media company with a portfolio of 27 pay TV channels and services. And finally, Graham Stanley is the Chief Commercial Officer for Insight TV. His core responsibility is to grow the presence of Insight TV across linear and digital platforms. And it is the world's leading 4K Ultra HD channel featuring action, sport, lifestyle, and entertainment content. Welcome. Thank you. I'm very excited. All right. So, you have a slide up? All right. So this is actually just a little bit of background. So this was a, no, you can't see this, but this was a slide that Salim and I were mentioned to me, and I thought it would be actually really interesting to put up at the beginning, because I think it's a good segue into what I'm sort of hoping is going to be the topic here, which is, where are we today? How's that changed from the last 5 or 10 years, and where are we going? And when I say that, I mean that as a content business. I mean that as the people, the individuals here or in this room who make, buy, sell, market content, which will continue to be, I think, what we do regardless of the environment that's changing around it. So I think our goal here is not to spend a lot of time talking about the changes that are happening corporately, but to really focus on what it is that we do and that we're passionate about and why we do it. So with that, I'll let you jump into
Sure. Thank you for coming. We were genuinely worried that there would be like 2 people in the room. You guys at the back, there are 6 chairs here if anyone wants to come and sit down. Please come in. Look, so we are now BBC Studios, just 1 minute background on us. We used to be BBC Worldwide, which was the biggest distribution company outside of the Hollywood studios. We combined on the 1st of April with the BBC in-house production team. So they're the brilliant people that make amazing natural history programs like Blue Planet 2, incredible dramas like Sherlock, etc. So we are now an end-to-end content investment company. So we better understand content demand and customer demand, and can make better and smarter investment decisions and production decisions based on that. So the reason I wanted to show this slide to you is we feel that we are now in the business of creating global franchises. So it's not about creating one show that pops when you broadcast it on UK public service television and then we sell it around the world. It's really about how do we create something incredible, magical, and then take it out to audiences on whatever platform they're on. So you really create a halo effect around the main program that you're trying to get people behind. So this was just an example of what we did with Blue Planet in October last year. So in the lead up to the launch of Blue Planet, we partnered with Hans Zimmer, who wrote the score, the famous musician, and we put him in the studio with Radiohead, the famous band. They created an incredible soundtrack, and we created a prequel from some of the content that wasn't seen in the main show. And we put that on Facebook, on YouTube, on various other platforms. That became one of the most liked. It had over 100 million likes on Facebook. It had over 43 million views on YouTube, and it had live on all kinds of different services. But that, as well as all of the other activity, helped us to create more of a buzz in the UK. It became the highest rated show in the UK on BBC television last year. It's actually on any channel, I think. It's simulcast on our BBC Earth channels around the world. And we did loads of other activities. So we did lots of VR with a deal with Google Daydream. We did some various quiz apps. We did some partnerships with Giphy. We did the usual home entertainment stuff with Blu-rays and books. We did a giant screen. There's loads to mention on that. But it's just about understanding where that your audience lives effectively everywhere, and you take the content out in different manners and different packages to where the viewers want to consume the content, and hopefully that will give you a big halo effect to the main show in itself.
So, Gary, do we want to follow on from that? How does this impact you? Are you guys going in this type of direction too, or?
Yeah, sure. So again, just quickly who we are. So All3 Media International is part of the All3 Media Group. So we're owned by Discovery and Liberty Global. We are the distributor for the group. We own, I think it's around 28 production businesses now. So we're involved in the space, very much on a day-to-day basis. I think. What Salim is saying with all of this, and this is ancillary and opportunities sort of on steroids, and it's a fantastic case study. But what we're seeing is that you need to do this stuff for your brands to break through. So at All3 we have our own viewer panel now. So we have a viewer panel in the UK of 2,000 viewers. And we asked them literally a couple of weeks ago how they discover new content. And the majority of people still watch on-air promotions, and that drives them to view. And if you look at the way the world is moving in terms of non-linear, every broadcaster we deal with now has some sort of catch-up service. It's no longer a given that your audience is going to see those on-air promos. So it's really important to be involved in this space and do as much as you can around brands. So it's absolutely something we're looking at.
Yeah, I think that what's interesting from our point of view, and I speak as someone who works on formats rather than selling finished product. So I work for Banijay Rights, which is the distribution arm of the Banijay Group. And I think that the important thing for us is, to go back to one of your previous slides, viewers are a lot more discerning now. And I think that there used to be a fixation with formats of looking for the new thing the whole time. Everybody was waiting for a different mix cycle, looking to see what the latest releases from the big production companies were. And I think that what we've seen in the past sort of 5 years is the entrenchment of very established brands, which viewers are familiar with, because I think in such a crowded marketplace, that kind of brand recognition, familiarity is very, very important to get viewers to come to your product. So we've seen shows like Wife Swap, which is now into its 25th season in Romania, or Psychic Challenge, which is into its 19th season in Russia. So we've seen a lot of formats which have kind of established really strong brand loyalty amongst viewers, specifically in Central and Eastern Europe, where it's I think some people consider it a threat because it's quite hard to launch new IP into the region, but we certainly see it as something which is very special about Eastern Europe, is the loyalty of the viewers and the fact that they will keep coming back to shows that they love. So we found that that's been a very, very important way of breaking out in this kind of crowded marketplace.
So as a buyer, sort of maybe the only one on the panel, what's your perspective on that? I mean, and how does that impact, these are all great things, but if you're not necessarily involved in all the ancillary, how does it impact your decisions, and how does it?
Well, overall, we've seen a change in quality of the content. Just to give a quick snap overview of the channels I buy for, range from a bouquet of thematic factual channels to movie channels, and we've recently launched a period drama scripted channel across the EU, and it covers Scandinavia, Central and Eastern Europe, Russia, CIS, Sub-Saharan Africa. So for us, we cover a vast footprint. So what we acquire needs to work across everything, because we actually have single fees for some of those. So we focus on our major markets like Poland to make those decisions. But overall, in the content, obviously, with all the changes everyone's been talking about, it does have its challenges, but overall, in the quality of the content, it's a great opportunity for us. And the change in the perception of the producers in terms of how they manage the rights and how they retain the rights gives us a greater opportunity to collaborate. And coming at an early stage where we wouldn't have been able to compete previously. So it's all really refreshing, actually.
And now you come at it from Grim, the 4K, Ultra HD, like everything you guys do is in 4K?
It is, indeed. And I think compared to others on the panel, we're a little bit different in the sense that we are a startup. So we've been going for approximately 2 years now, 1.5 years, 2 years. The TV service is called Insight TV, and we're actually a SVOD platform as well as a linear channel proposition. And some of our big challenges are all around a brand that is starting out, and so awareness is a big issue. Along with that, programming that we create in 4K, in UHD. So not well known or seen in many different places in the world. So, you know, when I hear about Hans Zimmer and Radiohead and Wales, I get jealous. I would love to have that kind of power. You know, the fact that, you know, you can look at a 5-year track record, I think, from BBC or others is a nice to have, because you can begin to track and understand what your audiences are doing. We don't have a bloody clue what our audiences are doing. We're learning every day. And our audiences are worldwide. They're in Korea, they're in the United States, they're in Germany, they are everywhere. And coming back to not data, but at least some of the challenges that are associated with linear TV and SVOD. When you are not dominant or you don't have full coverage in any one market, you do become very reliant on communication through social media, through the internet. Us positioning ourselves and cross-promoting ourselves on our linear channel just will not cut it. So understanding who is consuming, has an interest, and frankly have an interest in the programming that we're creating becomes solid gold for us, because at the moment, the amount of data points we have are few and in between. I think one of the interesting things that we do find, though, is with the platforms we work with, they have been very supportive. The Deutsche Telecoms and the Layer 3s in the US, SKB in Korea, in providing us with data, and so that has helped us to understand what is working, what's not working. And as the SVOD platform generates more interest and more subscribers, we're equally seeing there what is better and not in terms of our programming trajectory.
So everybody's mentioned brand, and it's come out whether it's franchise, which is essentially a multi sort of line of business brand, or whether it's just on the content, or it's on the channel and the awareness, or the channel side. Is that the biggest difference that you will see over the last 5-10 years in the business? Is that now everything's really kind of become a brand if it's going to stand out and work and drive it, or is that just for the top 1% of things and everything else just gets made and bought and sold anyway?
Well, I think the quality of the content is still paramount. I mean, you can have the best brand in the world, but if you make a duck, it's not going to do well, even if it carries that brand. The brand just helps you amplify the quality of the content. And you can do various things to increase the longevity of that particular piece of content as well. So we've been planning, it has a history in the Planet series, and it enables us to also, that brand, that franchise then enables us to increase the investment in the next view, so that we create something much bigger than just one standalone program.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. We are creating programs that no one has seen, but once they have begun to generate real lives of their own. I mean, we have a brand no one's heard of, and quite frankly, it's a brand that is not easy to pronounce in certain countries. So you come up with a real need to drive it through quality programming. And when consumers begin to lose interest in programming, I mean, there's one very large company that starts with a D that just seems to be having a lot of trouble lately with that sort of thing. And it's in part because it's got a perception issue. So it is critical to have good, high quality, relevant programming.
I think it's about programming cutting through as well. I mean, if I look at sort of our portfolio of sales, I mean, there is still space in as well for the 1 or 2 part documentaries, and they're great, but actually, as a broadcaster, they're quite difficult to schedule, and it's quite difficult to make those shows noisy enough to cut through and justify the marketing spend to make that a success.
And do you see the same things?
Yeah, and also for us, return on investment on a longer run series and getting traction and building brand loyalty with audience is more needed when we have a longer run series. So yeah.
So one of the things that sort of comes up a lot in the U.S. right now is, and in the conversation certainly that we have, is what defines a hit, and how has that changed, and whatever. And part of the reason for that is that I think in the U.S. it is changing. Some of the broadcasters and certainly some of the studios are redefining for themselves what a hit means. It can be, it's not just Nielsen C3s anymore. It can be money. It can be whatever else. Are we seeing that same type of thing happen in this region, or is it still just about eyeballs and ad sales and how much you're selling for?
Yeah, on the channel side, I think it's still pretty much based on the stock numbers and eyeballs.
Yeah, I think in terms of that kind of analytics, we're still slightly behind in CV. So yes, it really is down to eyeballs and then revenue from a content sales perspective.
But also these things build over time, as there is an argument for longevity as well. That's really why the streaming platforms have traditionally preferred shows that return, because you can build that over a number of series and make it a hit.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we see with the formats, is the returning series, and to me a hit is something which achieves the job it's set out to do. So if that's a small, relatively small format which is commissioned on a small platform that is there for kind of marketing purposes or to make a noise, and it does that, then it's achieved what it's set out to do, and it's a hit. But equally, there's other definitions of a hit to do with viewers, to do with much bigger productions. So yeah, I think it's to do with, for me personally, it's to do with longevity and achieving what you set out to do.
Yeah, no, look, I think longevity is key for us. Again, going for a year and a half, a hit for us, more or less, is that people have watched it, that it is not, hey, that's great when that happens. You certainly know it too, because people will send you Twitter and Facebook and other comments saying that was crap or that was great. Love that immediate feedback. That we can generate some sponsorship revenue around it, that we can sell it in the market after we've premiered it and windowed it on our own routes to market. So we're only now beginning to renew some series. We've got 2 that we have renewed, but we are continually looking at new formats and new concepts and ideas equally, because at the moment we are still finding our way.
So in the US also, and I think the UK and certain parts of Western Europe right now, the amount of new content that can be viewed is increasing faster than people are spending time on TV, right? I mean, the good news is we're seeing people essentially spend more of their day consuming video, certainly in a lot of the world's markets, so that's a win for us, but it's not, right, the graphs aren't moving at the same sort of pace. How do you guys deal with that? How do you differentiate that? I mean, I think this is partly a channel question, but I think it also applies to how you guys then try and sell content into the channel. How do you try and differentiate against that and make yourself sort of heard?
Well, for us, we don't actually have a standalone OTT platform across CEE. We tend to acquire rights, on-demand and media rights, because the operators have their own services where they're available. And obviously it's different for factual channels than scripted, but we're well aware that CEE is still slightly behind, but there is actually a growing interest in SVOD. So, you know, we don't necessarily differentiate. We focus primarily on the linear channels and try to build franchises out of our content, whether it's through genres. Some channels, obviously, some of the channels are more open to that than some of the others. So we try to capture the audience through content
So you have to stand for something to differentiate yourself. But I'm really lucky working for the BBC because obviously we're there to inform, educate and entertain. We've had that in our principle right from the very beginning. But so long as you know, your audience is very clear on what they're going to get when they come to your brand and come to your channel, in this world where there is so much content to consume, you just need a trusted guide to enable you to find your way through it.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I look at what we've done as a business, certainly in the last sort of 18 months, we've been much more focused on how we elevate our content in the marketplace. You're right, there are so many hours of programming available. So we have a far bigger focus now on the festivals that we manage programming for. So if I think of an example, you know, a great drama in our catalogue is a show called National Treasure, written by Jack Thorne, and was picked up by Hulu in the US. Now, on paper, that could be, certainly at the time that the drama was written, quite a domestic-focused issue. You know, we had issues around 1970s presenters and all that kind of stuff kicking off. It could be a very nice UK-centric piece. But the fact that we took that on the festival circuit, the fact that it was winning multiple awards, suddenly lifted that into a big international drama that sold incredibly well for us. So it's not just about rating stories. Of course, we try and, you know, as everybody does, push our best foot forward in terms of how the show's performed, but it's actually elevating it and bringing it to the attention of people on the global stage.
Yeah, I think that what we've seen in the past couple of years, a lot of this has come through work we've done with our local partners. Because obviously we're quite a decentralised business, we sell formats to the best producers in any region or the best broadcasters, and they come up with the local production in consultation with us. And the two key trends that I've seen in the past few years are there's an increased commitment to marketing shows throughout their run, normally through social media. And so a lot of our most successful shows, such as Wife Swap, which launched in Poland recently, or Temptation Island in Romania, they've got they lend themselves to shareable content, which can go viral or which can be used to kind of remind viewers of their presence. That's one key aspect. The other key aspect is an increased focus on live participation in shows. So with Survivor in Italy and Spain, we've got live weekly shows, which it means that viewers can't time shift, they have to actually be present for the live event. And one of our most successful new shows, All Against One from Scandinavia, we've seen that it's got a very integral play-along element in which viewers, it's kind of wisdom of the crown versus a contestant. And that's been a very, very strong hit for us because there's no point recording it, there's no point watching it on catch-up, you've got to be right there to play along with it. So those two trends, I think, have really emerged for us in the past couple of years.
So, look at this. As we're moving forward as a group of people, are you seeing this idea that there will continue to be this nomenclature, how we separate linear from non-linear, or broadcast from not, or is essentially the entire new generation coming up indifferent to the means of access, in the same way that when DTH was launched, nobody really understood how it worked. It didn't matter as long as they got 100 channels in their home? Or do you think we'll still continue to sell differently and buy differently in and market differently?
I don't think it's necessarily possible to carry on with the status quo from lots of angles. I mean, as a viewer, I never know where to find a show. You know, in some regions, it's already become so difficult between linear and non-linear that it's hard to get either to take those rights without the other. So personally, my view is that we're moving to a world where we will license rights in a block to a particular company for a period of time. And in many ways, in terms of our role as a distributor, you know, we project on these projects over 3 to 5 years, several cycles. And if you start to, as we have traditionally done, sort of break up those rights, it's very difficult to move from window to window because you might have a lagging pod contract or a lagging entertainment contract or something. So actually to license content in a block to a platform so that as a consumer, you know where you can find that. From a platform point of view, you will market that show because you know that there's not going to be any leakage notwithstanding piracy. So you're going to have all of that. And as a distributor, I can move that from window to window quite successfully.
And Andrew, how do you feel about that?
I mean, I think that if you look at some of the conversations we're having with brands like Survivor, for example, we're talking to bot platforms as well as to broadcasters with kind of smaller but equally popular formats. We're seeing that channels aren't necessarily respecting the old hierarchy of having their biggest channel for the biggest formats, their second biggest channel for the second biggest formats. They're kind of picking 2 or 3 titles which will help to define each of their channels. And if they're big formats, that works. If they're small formats, that works. But increasingly, there's a flattening out of the old hierarchy of broadcast channel right down to VOD platforms.
I think it differs on territory. So in CEE, where a subscription to Netflix or Amazon is the same price as a pay TV subscription, and you're getting 80 channels for the same price, I think it's going to be, I think pay TV still has a longevity. I think it will take time for most of the streamers to really get full penetration. So I think at the moment we're windowing quite successfully in terms of linear and then VOD. So they are quite disparate in CE for us, but things will change.
Yeah, I agree with Philip from a broadcaster point of view. I mean, we've been buying the vast amount of rights, both linear and VOD, for a number of years now. And we work really well with distributors, independent smaller studios, obviously, to secure those rights. But it does definitely depend per territory and the exclusivities that you're able to get as well.
It's interesting for us because we are able to essentially do what we want wherever we want to do it. We don't have legacy businesses to try and protect. So when we enter a market, like we did in 2017, we started the year with about 4 platforms. We ended the year with about 24, 25 platforms. We had this huge explosion of growth down to 2 things. The first one was our UHD content, and then the quality of the content that was on the channel. And although we are working with these platforms now and we're adding them on a monthly basis, what we do find is that SVOD and online is a critical component to the business for a couple of reasons. We're able to window all of our content on our linear UHD channel and on our SVOD UHD platform at the same time. The channels aren't available everywhere, so that enables us to appeal to more disparate audiences regardless of where they are. But the second point is that advertising is still very regional, national in scope. You can't really go and sell, some do, but it's very difficult to do pan-European, for instance. So if you want to generate advertising revenue, you really do need to have something on a linear channel or in a form that can be measured and can generate revenue within a prime time or a national schedule. So where we are now, not so worried about generating advertising, is very much just the exploitation across different routes to market and platforms wherever we can establish that.
Fantastic. So look, I think we're going to try and start wrapping up, but great place to sort of get there, I think, would be if each one of you start, Andrew, working our way down this way, throw out your sort of, what are you focusing on over the next 3 to 5 years? We know the conversations we're having now, we're all kind of having, I think the same ones, but what is it that you're already kind of looking ahead to, watching out for, or, focusing on? And Gary had talked a little bit about this sort of block buying, and you mentioned earlier a little bit about the sort of flattening of broadcasters, but how are you looking to deal with that as you're moving out into your next formats and your next sales cycles?
I guess our primary concern will be brand protection, as ever. And I mean, that's something where, as the fragmentation grows, I think there's tremendous pressure on budgets. Sometimes with formats, there's a belief that once you've seen it, it's relatively easy to replicate, and that's, as we all know, that's not the case. There's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes in order to keep premium content premium. And so I think that as things are squashed in the next 5 years, as audiences kind of move about more quickly, and as budgets kind of follow them, I think the key thing to do is to make sure that our content reaches as many people as possible, but at the same time maintains its high quality.
So I think for us, it's looking at the routes to market. I mean, All3Media International will always be a B2B distributor. That is the core of what we do. But as we move from market to market, and every market is different, there will be content that is probably less in demand from a buyer point of view. And we still have those rights. So what we're looking at is how we can build brands, so we're back to that word, and do more stuff directly with the consumer. So in the US, for example, we've launched a House and Garden over-the-top SVOD service. Now that's not taking the rights away from any deal that we would have traditionally done. They're rights that we're not being licensed, but there is a passion group around that. So we're very much looking at that niche VOD space and looking at how technology can help us build our business without cannibalizing what we already do.
I think for us in CE, it's about increasing our branded services, expanding what we do in our channels. At the moment, we just have BBC Earth in this region, but we've got 6 or 7 big brands that we look to take to the marketplace and understand what we do in digital around branded services and whether we launch those kind of things here. And then it's just to continue making brilliant, class-leading content.
For us, for the channels, it's to continue trying to secure good quality content at early stage, whether through pre-buys and co-productions with creative collaborations. On the business side, on the channel side, it's to continue with territory expansions and other possibilities.
I've got like a personal and a company one. The personal one is, I'm next 3 to 5 years, I'm going to be sleeping a lot. I wake up in the morning, I've got 20 emails from Asia, and then during the day it's coming in from Europe, and then it's the US in the evening. Life hates me. So I would like to try to sleep more. We're growing rapidly. I need to hire more people to just manage that. We are, as I said last year, we went from 4 to 24 platforms, and the way in which you manage and grow rapidly, I think, is one of our biggest challenges at the moment. In parallel to that, we also have to make sure that we stay extremely focused on our core audience, which we like to call millennials. Which, as you know, are a disparate group and are people who are younger or young at heart, and making sure that we get ever so better at creating programming that is of interest and is meaningful to them is really something that we need to make sure we keep a focus on as we expand our channel distribution and our SVOD platform and other routes to market worldwide. So those are some of the things that I personally and the company will be focusing on.
Well, fantastic. Thank you. Anything anybody wants to add? I really appreciate you guys coming up here and joining me on this. I think you know, you all have unique viewpoints on what we're doing, and as you can hear, there's definitely different viewpoints and definitely different perspectives at the different stages that we're looking at. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. One more time for Courtney Williams and this fine panel. If you have one more second, can we possibly take just one or two questions? Is that all right with you guys? I don't want to put you on the spot. Yeah. Just time for one or two. Any key questions anybody has?
For anybody?
What an inquisitive group we have. All right, once again, thanks very much. We have more conference sessions over the next 2 days. Thank you very much. Other music?